The Socialism Conference is the place in this country where we meet people who are involved in movement work, activist work on the ground in communities all across the country.
What I really love about Socialism Conference is that it's a space to be in community with other socialists, be in community with other people who are thinking about how do we actually build a movement for revolutionary and radical change in the world, and also just to have fun and hear about some of the work that each other is doing, to be inspired.
There is nothing that recreates the experience of being in Rome and being able to fellowship, being able to share ideas, being able to feel each other's presence in the physical form. It allows for a different level of connection. It allows for energetic vibrations that can't be captured via Zoom or via teleconference.
It's an opportunity for us to meet like-minded people. While we have a million differences, we're all in the struggle to make a better world, to make a world of balance and peace and justice and joy. And I find comrades here every time I come.
It's a place where we can dream about abolition and think about how we're going to create campaigns, how we're going to deconstruct the state while we're simultaneously creating the communities and care we need for all to survive and thrive.
If you are in any form of radical politics, movement building, art practice, facilitation, healing, and restorative work, I don't know of another gathering that happens like this that puts those entities together. And it's not just an elitist conference. A lot of times you can go to a space like this and there's a lot of top line names and everyone else feels like an audience. But here this feels like a community co-learning and interacting with each other.
If you are a person that's trying to figure out how we can prioritize putting people over profit instead of profit over people, if you're a person that believes in racial justice and the social good, socialism might be a place where you could find your folks.
If you believe that we deserve a world where people are cared for, where people's needs are met, and where people can truly self-determine, socialism is a conference for you. This space will help connect you to those people for you to grow and build with for years to come.
I don't understand how we can ultimately dismantle any of it if we don't stick to a intensely radical politics.
You're not broke if you're taxing rich people.
We break production for profit and we replace it by production for need.
This event is brought to you by Haymarket Books. Now more than ever, it is critical to support independent publishers, independent bookstores, and independent voices. There are two ways you can do this today. First, by buying books from Haymarket at haymarketbooks.org. And secondly, by joining the Haymarket Book Club. The following event will be recorded and shared afterwards on the Haymarket Books YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video now, and share it with as many people as possible. If you like this event, be sure to catch these upcoming events in Haymarket's live stream series. You can register for these upcoming events on the Haymarket Books Eventbrite page. If you miss an event, you can listen to the recording afterward by subscribing to our podcast, Haymarket Live, wherever you get your podcasts. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. We are moderating the chat, but we cannot guarantee that everyone will observe our community guidelines. People who violate these guidelines will have their comments deleted as quickly as we are able. This event will have live closed captions. Instructions for accessing the captions will be posted in the chat. We should have time for Q&A, so please post your questions in the YouTube chat window, and we'll get to those later in the program. Thanks for joining us today. Our event will begin shortly.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Malaika Jabali, the moderator for today's event, and I am so excited to be in conversation with these two incredible co-authors, Leah Hunt-Hendrix and Astra Taylor. Their book, Solidarity, the Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea, was an absolute joy for me to read. And I think especially now, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the world. Some of the gloom and doom is coming from me, just in my own surroundings. Like, where is there a glimmer of hope? And this book does that for me. And I hope that it would do it for you too, if you have not already read it. It gives us some light in the darkness. So I want to thank Astra and Leah personally for writing this book. It is so thoroughly researched. It is grounded in history, and it really gives us a vision for moving forward. So you get 3 in 1 here with this book. So that's my own spiel, but now I want to give you the publisher's spiel about the book. Leah Hunt-Hendrix and Astra Taylor offer a lively and lucid history of the idea, from ancient Rome through the first European and American socialists and labor organizers, to 21st century social movements like Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter, tracing the philosophical debates and political struggles that have shaped the modern world. Looking forward, they argue that a clear understanding of how solidarity is built and sustained, and an awareness of how it has been suppressed, is essential to warding off the many crises of our present: right-wing backlash, irreversible climate damage, widespread alienation, loneliness, and despair. So for the event tonight, I'll be asking them some questions, but we're also going to open the floor for the audience to ask questions as well. But before we do that, I want to get into the background of these brilliant authors. Leah Hunt-Hendrix is an organizer and writer who works on economic inequality and democracy. She is co-founder of the Solidaire Network and Way to Win, networks of progressive philanthropists that support social movements and electoral politics, respectively. She received her PhD from Princeton University in religion, ethics, and politics, where she wrote her dissertation on the ethics of solidarity. So we got the expert right here, okay? Astra Taylor is a writer, documentary filmmaker, and political organizer. Her books include the American Book Award winner, The People's Platform, Taking Back Power and Culture in a Digital Age, and Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone. Her films include What is Democracy and Examined Life. Her 2023 book, The Age of Insecurity, Coming Together as Things Fall Apart, was part of the CBC Massey Lecture Series. She is an advisor to Lux Magazine, on the editorial board of Hammer and Hope, and a co-founder of the Debt Collective, the world's first debtors union. So my first question is, Astra, where do you even find the time? Like, how are you so able to do this and come here looking good? Okay, so that's actually not the first question. The first question is really, I want to start us off with a bit of a vision exercise, and something that hopefully our audience can think about too. When you envision a world where solidarity is the widespread worldview, unlike the worldview we have now, where capitalism has run amok, where individualism is the idea of the day, what does that world look like? And we can start with either of you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Malaika, for that wonderful introduction, and to Haymarket and everyone here for joining tonight. It's great to be with you all. That's such a great question. I think that, well, you've hit on the purpose of the book, which is to propose that we actually bring solidarity back as a key principle, key value of democracy and of the kind of society we're trying to build. So just like justice, liberty, equality, we are arguing that solidarity should be up there in the pantheon of ideals, not just a catchword, something you sign your emails with in solidarity, something you throw around. We think it's a really important value. And the French Revolution had liberty, equality, fraternity. It had this relational concept, and some of our book goes into the history of that time in France in the 1800s, how the idea of fraternity sort of morphed into the idea of solidarity, and then got picked up by the labor movement. And but it didn't really transfer to the United States, and it never really quite made it into that pantheon. And so that's what we're arguing, is that it needs to be there. We need a concept about to sustain democracy, we need to actually think about the relationships between people and the fabric of our relationships. And this is actually a kind of a confrontation to a lot of liberal political theory over the past half century or longer, which tried to create a theory of justice, a theory of democracy that didn't depend on good relationships between people. It was very procedural, and tried to create a good society regardless of how people felt about each other. And I think that project failed. And so we and that's part of why we're falling apart. And so to your question of what would it look like, I think there would be more participation, more participatory democracy. Democracy is not just something you do every 2 years at the ballot box, 2 years or 4 years. People would be participating in unions, in other local organizations where they had a say over their lives, over the conditions that they were living in. It would be a society that prioritized having public goods that everyone could use and participate in regardless of their income or wealth. It would be a society that that I think just really valued the relationships between people, obviously prioritized gender justice, multiracial justice, and also climate, understanding the fact that we are integrated together in we are fundamentally interdependent, and especially interdependent with the climate, with the nature around us, and that we're just kind of all in this together. It's like we all survive or we all don't, and would kind of prioritize that collective condition.
Yeah. Now, Astra, before you answer, I actually want to tweak it a little bit. It's the same question, but given what Leah said in terms of justice and democracy, just kind of in a vacuum, not really creating that world that we might ultimately envision. Again, what is your ultimate vision, and why is solidarity unique, where it might get us there better than just, justice and democracy in this liberal framework?
Yeah, I love that. And I just want to thank you for your amazing introduction. Thank you for being here. And I want to shout out your book and recommend that people get it. It's Not You, It's Capitalism is brilliant. And so everyone should check that out, because it's also part of the picture. It's part of the whole, theory that we need to all grasp. I mean, it's a great question. I mean, Leah said a lot of it, but what solidarity brings to the table again is this relational thing. Solidarity is something that happens between people, between groups. And we've been trying to theorize democracy within this liberal framework without paying attention to that, right? Because it's been founded on this myth of the, individual, rational, of course, coded white, coded male, coded able-bodied subject. And so that's actually been the democratic toolkit, that it's not just like academics using it. I mean, this is the way people who become influential figures in our society are trained to think. And so, but there's no society without relations. There's no life without relations. And so I think that's part of what solidarity at its most basic does. I mean, solidarity at its most basic is group. It's kind of the stuff that holds groups together. We can talk more about our theorization of solidarity. So Leah and I distinguish between what we call reactionary solidarity, which is sort of negative group cohesion, and transformative solidarity, which is powerful world-changing solidarity. But I mean, the idea of relationship is so key because this sounds maybe a little hippy-dippy, but it's also scientific. We are, none of us are individuals. We are interdependent with each other, with the natural world. And so solidarity, and the way that we talk about it in the book, is actually the recognition of that, of the fact that we are bound to other people, we are bound to the planet, and a more solidaristic world would have that sort of at the center of the framework, the center of its sort of, philosophy, and would manifest that in all sorts of policy ways. So we lay out our idea for what we call a solidarity state, but fundamentally it's about caring for those relations instead of, pretending that we're cordoned off, or creating a system that's founded on exploitation and violence and accumulation. So I think, it's so striking now that I have this lens, thanks really to Leah, who brought this idea to the table. Because I've written about democracy. I made a film about democracy, and I was just putting solidarity in there, like at the end, like, oh yeah, some solidarity would be nice. I mean, it is actually a precondition of an egalitarian functioning society, and it has really gotten short shrift,
Yeah. And what I loved about the book is that you provide the history of that. Like, it's not something that we just started saying in 2016 or 2020 or, among some lefty hippy dippy people in the last 20 years. This is something that is centuries in the making, and it's not unnatural to how people have thought about the world, even though I would say in a lot of, mainstream Western thought, it's foreign or unique or something that other people do, but it's not something that Westerners do. So I just love that you show that it has those roots in history, with a lot of philosophers abiding by it. So along with that, a common theme throughout the book is that solidarity is distinct from unity. Because I think if we just think about it in layman's terms, solidarity sounds like, oh, we're all alike and we just all get along. Can either of you talk about why it's different and why that distinction is important?
Yeah, this is something we're pretty adamant about. I mean, we do a lot of solidarity is not this, it's not this, it's not that, clear the kind of conceptual field. But solidarity is not unity is really central. And that because, unity is cohesion without difference, right? President Biden loves to give talks where he's saying we need to have unity, we need to unite. And it's a way of, papering over the real, disparities, the real political differences, and the real challenges that we face. So solidarity for us is relations across difference. And that's also part of why it's such an important concept to really think about, because we need to be able to build relationships across difference. I mean, day to day, Leah and I are most concerned with how we can help in some small way build a multiracial, multi-generational, multi-geographic movement that can fight for change. So we need to figure out how to build bridges across difference. And so solidarity, I think, is a concept that can help us do that. If you go back to this long tradition of thought out of which the concept evolved that we trace, we go back to these philosophers in the 1800s into the early 1900s, sort of right there in the Industrial Revolution, who were asking questions about how society could stick together, how society could hold together in a period of incredible tumult. Again, rapid industrialization, also a move into a different political form, away from feudalism into more democratic structures. So how does the world hold together in the absence of God or king? And they started talking about solidarity as an idea that could be this glue. And a metaphor they used was of the human body. The human body has all these different parts. We have eyes, we have a neck, we have knees, we have a spleen, we have lungs, and all of these parts are kind of whole, but it's not, it's not unified, it's homogeneous. And so I think there's kind of a really interesting sort of philosophical history there, but I think there's also a political ideal that we think is really important, which is we're not asking everyone to be exactly the same. And That's both a reflection of reality. We're not the same. We have to figure out how to work together. And also, we shouldn't be the same. There's something kind of authoritarian and dogmatic and really reductive about that anyway, that I think Leah and I are both just kind of allergic to.
Mm-hmm. Leah, did you want to add anything to that in terms of why that distinction between unity and solidarity is important?
I think Astra covered it. I think she covered it.
Okay, so let's get into the origins of this book, because I thought it was really fascinating hearing about both of your backgrounds. So I'd love for you to share what brought you two together and how did you decide to write this book? Leah, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I can start. Well, so as you mentioned in my bio, I come from a family that has an interesting history, actually has an oil company in Texas. So I was raised kind of in the middle of a pretty Republican family. Also, but my mom was a progressive philanthropist in the women's movement, friends with Gloria Steinem, and very involved in funding the women's movement. She was amazing. But I, for a long time, was struggling with wealth inequality as just like a fundamental injustice in society. Also climate, kind of where our family got its wealth. And so trying to figure out like what was my role in society. And, we all just start from where we start, you can only kind of be who you are. And to me, as I got more involved in kind of social movements, I did feel like, as I learned about class privilege and my role was really to be in solidarity. It was not necessarily to be the person who figured out the best strategy or led at the barricades, because partly given kind of where I came from. But to really be like an accomplice and a comrade. And so I got involved in progressive organizing and then in Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street started when I was in graduate school. And I was actually writing a dissertation on social movement. And I had started writing on the concept of solidarity when Occupy Wall Street started. I had chosen the topic because I had heard, I would hear the concept, I would hear the word, and when I would go to the library and look in the stacks, there was nothing really there. There were books on the history of the Polish solidarity movement, and a few books kind of on distinctions between like social solidarity versus political solidarity, but very, very academic. And it just felt like this was a field that needed to be fleshed out. And so I was writing, my dissertation was very narrow, very focused on kind of the history in the 1800s, a few philosophers talking about this. But then Occupy Wall Street started, and I met Astra there. And over the next years, we began kind of organizing together. I was a huge fan. I am a huge fan of the Debt Collective. I think it's just a genius strategy for how to organize people in the age of financialization. And I've just been a huge admirer of her work. And I think at some point she was like, Leah, this dissertation, let's get this idea out into the public. And I was like, well, maybe if you help me, if we can do it together, then let's do it. So we wrote an article in 2019 in the New Republic, and then kind of during COVID decided to write the whole book. And because, COVID was one of those times when you would think that there would be this kind of natural sense of solidarity facing this massive collective crisis. And that didn't happen. And if anything, it was the opposite. It was this massive moment of polarization. And so it felt really important to write a book about how solidarity is not something like we have a lot of key points in the book, but one of them is that solidarity is not something that's just given. It's not something that you just find lying around. It's any kind of solidarity, even the solidarity of a family, I would say, is made through activity and time spent on relationships. And so solidarity is something that we need to actively construct. And it just felt like this, more than any time before, this is a moment when we need to understand that, and when we need to start really doing that work. So that was the purpose of the book.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned COVID, because I've had those same thoughts about how this should be a unifying, or maybe not unifying, but at least a principle where people can find some solidarity, because there are similarities in terms of this virus that is universal. And it was so disappointing to see just how the opposite it was in our culture. So I have a question about that I'm going to ask later, but I also want to give Astra the opportunity to add to this if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that I think, part of the book's genesis too is just the decade of really serious organizing that Leah and I both did after Occupy. And I mean, Leah's brilliant and brought this really interesting dissertation. I was really honored to be invited into this process of thinking together. But so much of our thinking really is rooted in organizing and like what we've learned over the years trying to do with that. And so I think this book sits at an interesting intersection of theory and practice, and just trying to show how much intellectual work is actually done in movements, how much thinking needs to be there. And for me, part of what made Leah such an exciting writing partner was like, she's, she doesn't toot her own horn very much, but like there's so many movements that have changed the political landscape that she's been part of and kind of, has been a strategist in. And so I think, working with someone who also is at that intersection of, really gets into nerdy, like ancient philosophy, but then also is like, hold on, how do we build power and like fight the bad guys today? It's a great mix. Like, and you're also, I think that's like my favorite combination.
Mm-hmm. I would agree in terms of that interpretation and how I read it, because it gets into some really like deep history that's like super niche that I just never would have known about. But then there's also this beautiful writing, and it's powerful and it's evocative and moving. Like there were times where I wanted to cry, and I was like, I was screenshotting stuff. I was like, it was an excellent balance. So thank you for offering that to us. So thinking about this COVID example and how there is a part of us where we are interdependent, but then there's this part of us that's individualistic, especially in the West, especially in the US. And you talk about, speaking of this history early in the book, you talk about the people who practice and philosophize around solidarity, these solidarists, and they view dependency as fundamental to our humanity. So I want to know, what was it about the United States where that got lost and hyper individualism took over? Like there's individualism all over, but the US is like an extreme case. As we saw with COVID, it was so ridiculous. So what is it, you guys both study history and movements, what is it about the US where we lost that interdependence?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we never had it, right? I mean, this is the thing about the United States is that, there's not some democratic interdependent past we can restore, right? We're trying to birth that into being, because this is a country founded on the dispossession of indigenous people, on the enslavement of people stolen from Africa, on, the disenfranchisement of poor white men, of women. So we're trying to create that solidaristic, interdependent consciousness. It's funny being on a Haymarket Zoom, because early on, and it might even have been March, I don't know, of 2020, I was on one of the early iterations of this with Astra Taylor and Naomi Klein. And we were still in that moment of the pandemic is a portal. We're going to have all of this learning. And in some ways we did. But there was also, there were people organizing for the opposite. And I think this is one of the key points of our book, which is that, solidarity is not our natural state, and but division is also not our natural state. It takes time, money, and energy to organize people in different directions. And a lot of work was put into atomizing folks during the first, tumultuous COVID wave. And a lot of energy spent, in fostering the fears and insecurities and kind of conspiracy theories that have taken over. And so I think we want to, recognize the sort of labor that involved. And, there's just, along, we have a chapter called Divide and Conquer that details different ways in which solidarity is sabotaged and has been since the genesis of this country through the legal regime that began in the colonial era by outlying labor organizing, from the history of racial separation and segregation, to the culture of capitalism, which encourages competition and a sense of scarcity and again individualism. So we're working against huge historical trends that are self-consciously aligned against solidarity. And so that moment, I think that initial wave of COVID was mixed because there was a lot of solidarity, but there was, again, this is also this tremendous effort to undermine it. I would recommend a book by a sociologist called 2020 that just came out that looks at COVID and also, of course, does more detailed kind of comparisons of the United States versus other countries, because not every country did as badly as this one. And so it definitely is not just human nature. It's something about our political and economic system.
Yeah, thank you for that. Leah, would you like to add as well?
Only to just kind of reiterate that I think it's not that Americans crave belonging, crave solidarity. We have a lot of the reactionary form. People are kind of coming together in ways that are exclusionary. But I think a lot of it also has to do with we have a very elitist foundations. Aziz Rana has a new book out on the Constitution, and we have a very elitist Constitution. And it's that kind of the economic power that we've let kind of flourish, the economic inequality that we've let flourish in America has created kind of a tool to break solidarity. Because breaking solidarity is what you need to sustain the power of a small elite group. So I would kind of locate our problem in the kind of oligarchy, the plutocratic nature of American society.
Yeah, one thing really quick to add to that. I mean, I think we put in the book that there's this idea, right? There's just something about Americans. They don't want to we don't have a labor party. We don't really have as robust labor unions. In the, sort of early decades, at the beginning of this country's history, people in the United States were actually more active. There were more strikes. There was more resistance against predatory employers. What sets the U.S. apart is not the sort of character of its people and their compliance or their eagerness to not have labor representation, but it's actually our legal regime. It's just how hostile to organization, to unionization, the laws that govern us are. That's what makes us exceptional. And so I think it's that's sort of a similar thing here. It's not that there's just something wrong with us, but that we're, fighting entrenched systems. And this is why it's just incumbent on us that we organize really intensely and really smartly.
Mm-hmm. And building off of that. Oh, go ahead, Leah. Yeah.
And for policy solutions, we need the PRO Act. We need to change our labor law so that to let people organize. Right now, solidarity strikes are illegal. So go ahead, Malaika.
Yeah, so I mean, just thinking about it as my college professors would ask us, why is that? Why did our legal system, just a lot of whys, what is behind our legal system being as stringent and as anti-labor as it is? If you have any thoughts about that. If not, I can ask another question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's just all sorts of, structures, the structure of the U.S. political system. We have two-party winner-take-all elections, there really isn't a sort of political, proportional representation has its problems too. I mean, there's not really sort of one panacea to the complex problems that we're talking about, except building solidarity. That is the answer. and also the, incredible role of money in politics in the U.S. system. We're also exceptional in that respect too. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is why we have to study history to answer these whys. How have a sort of plutocratic few been able to amass so much wealth and the power that wealth buys? And that's, one other way that this war on solidarity is being waged, right? So why is it now criminal to teach U.S. history in a way that draws attention to some of these founding inequities? And that's because we start figuring out, why is this country the way it is? So I think the answer is found in history. Capitalism as an economic system is one that concentrates wealth and power, and that's and it puts up a lot of obstacles to building the kind of solidarity that we're talking about. And the U.S. political system is just, the Constitution, as Leah said, is a critical component of this. But, our system has all of these sort of minoritarian veto points. The Electoral College, which overrides the popular vote. Why is that there? Well, because of a deal with slave-owning folks in the South. The malapportioned Senate, which gives disproportionate weight to rural states, to rural land, not even people, because it's not a population-based system. The way that our Congress is gerrymandered. I mean, we don't have an affirmative right to vote in the Bill of Rights. We only have negative liberties in this country. There are so many sort of foundational things in the American political system that actually are kind of affirmative action for the far right, which is ironic because they hate affirmative action when it's for anyone else. But, that's the chessboard. And the more power you have, the easier it is actually to amass more power and change the rules, to change those laws and regulations. And that's why we do have a chapter that's like, what would it be like to embed transformative solidarity into our political system? What would it be like? We're trying to do a thought experiment that's not totally pie in the sky. It's kind of like, what would be like a step beyond the welfare state that would put solidarity at the center? Because in a way, our political system is minoritarian. It is elitist and is about breaking solidarity in the sense of breaking kind of popular representation, the ability of ordinary people to collectively wield their power.
Mm-hmm. I think, go ahead, Leah, sorry. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to...
Go ahead.
I would just add that, people sometimes think, America's problem is that it's too diverse. It's not, we can't be Scandinavia because we're too much of a melting pot. But we really argue against that. We think that that there are lots of examples where that is not a problem. The problem is the divide and conquer strategies of the elite. And I think it's really important because I think even in a moment, as heated as now, when you're talking to family or people who are Trump supporters or something like this, the tendency is to feel like they're the enemy. Your enemy is kind of all around you. But we actually sort of argue that it's a very few people who are using divide and conquer tactics to kind of to stoke that conflict and to set us against each other. We draw on a lot of Ian Henny Lopez's work on race-class narrative, and who argues that the elite are using often racial stereotypes or tools. We see it recently, I feel like, in the sort of crime debates in San Francisco and elsewhere, as ways to wedge people against each other and turn them against each other. And but if we get stuck at that level, we're kind of playing on their turf. And so it takes real intellectual work to kind of step back and be like, oh wait, no, this is a game that is being like set up around us, and we need to look at what's happening and actually turn our attention to the Rupert Murdochs, the Elon Musks, the people who are actually kind of setting the frames of the debates to pull us apart.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think it goes to, I guess, what's unspoken but maybe assumed about the book is that we're not going to get to where we want with a world that's thriving, with people who are thriving, if we do not come together. Why is this important? Because it won't happen otherwise. even though they're a minority, they have, the most wealthy in the world who are using these divisions or creating these divisions and using them as wedges against us. They have been able to amass so much wealth and so much power because they've just been persistent and consistent with it. And sometimes, and often violent, like these aren't innate, these aren't things that are innate to humanity. So if we want to have a better world, we have to come together. Like, we got to figure it out. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. And I think you guys trace that so beautifully because, this isn't just it's a theory. It's almost like a necessity. It's like, how else are we going to do it? If the people who have some things in common aren't coming together. So I think, with that, I just felt like the book was extremely timely. It's powerful, but as I was reading it, I was like, there are just case studies that we can see right now. And you all published this book last fall before the Gaza Solidarity encampments. But as I was reading one of the chapters where you're talking about outside agitators as an example, it's like that's the exact frame that they're using right now for these students and other groups of people who are showing solidarity with Palestinians. And so I want to ask you, I'm sure people on this call are already familiar with that as a trope. They're familiar with how it's been weaponized, but I'd love for you all to talk more. I mean, if you even want to just talk about the Gaza Solidarity encampments and how that aligns with, as an example of solidarity. So that's kind of part A. And then part B, why is this outside agitator framing, or actually why is outside agitation a good thing?
Should I go?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want us to talk about the encampments first? And what do you think?
Sure. Well, I think that, it's been really amazing to watch how the clampdown on these encampments and on these protesters, the clampdown on civil liberties. We see peace as a basic, something that everyone deserves and has a right to, and to protest in the name of peace and ceasefire as, something that feels important and natural. And I think that, a lot of the student encampments were a really courageous kind of form of solidarity with the Muslim and Arab and Palestinian community that's undergoing extreme pain. It's been a moment where we've seen reactionary solidarity on all sides. We've seen people kind of pull apart, and I think it's important to focus on the moments of how this can be a time of transformative solidarity. There are beautiful examples of Israeli organizations, Israelis who are working in solidarity with Palestinians, American Jews who are working in solidarity with the peace movement. And so, it's painful. It's a painful time for so many people. And I think that the focus, we really do need, even in our pain, though, we can become reactionary. We can be, people can decide this is too bad, let's just burn it all down. And I think that's actually something to resist. And it's really hard to talk about because the pain is so real and important, and what's happening is so devastating. But I think we have to, part of the argument or the idea of solidarity is how do we think constructively and strategically, and how do we actually create a strong pro-peace movement in the United States over the long term, and a world that is safe for everyone in the Middle East, and a real solution to the conflict long term. Trump is not going to do that. Jill Stein is not going to do that. So I think it's a moment where we have to, we do have to think long term, and it's the real struggle. Like, the concept of solidarity is, I think the ideas of reactionary and transformative solidarity can be helpful in this moment in trying to think through the right, the right way to move to move constructively.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add that, I think the movement and the students, have moved the needle, right? Like the majority of people across political parties want a ceasefire now. And I think, one challenge is like, how do we take that opinion and turn it into a potent political force, right? That can actually stop something as basic as like stopping weapons sales. Like that is a low bar kind of thing. And so, I've been really moved watching the encampments. I think the reaction to them, the overreaction by administrators, the basically like militarized reaction. I mean, it's almost like the students were being treated as like an insurrection when they were actually just these peaceful, multi-faith encampments where people were dancing and sharing food and doing teach-ins and stuff was so sort of telling. I mean, there's a class of people, and it's not just Republicans, it is Democrats too, who are approaching Palestine as a wedge issue, who are basically saying this is an opportunity to, kind of split liberals and the left, to, demonize young activists by saying this movement is anti-Semitic. And it's coming from people who, in some cases, like Elise Stefanik, the representative from New York, who are like, have a history of just racist crap. I mean, it's just so absolutely cynical. These people do not care about anti-Semitism. They don't care about getting rid of bigotry on college campuses. In fact, they want to privatize college campuses. So, and then they have enablers. I mean, I'm thinking today of, somebody like Representative Mondaire Jones, endorsing George Latimer against Jamal Bowman, because Jamal Bowman is an extremist for being one of the early people to call for a ceasefire, which was obviously the ethical, sensible position. So we're in a really tricky time, and I think under these kinds of conditions, it is important that we still try to find ways to be open to people who are, changing their minds about things, who are, coming around to the position of ceasefire, even if it's taken them a long time, so that we can build real political power, so we can actually stop this war and create a peace movement that is about peace in the fullest sense, which I think is what Leo was getting at. Peace in the sense of everybody having their needs met, living without fear of violence, sharing this earth that we call home. Outside agitator trope goes back to this idea of, the ways movements are attacked and these politics of divide and conquer. So what did we hear at these encampments? I mean, we heard this from university administrators. We heard it from Mayor Eric Adams. Well, those aren't legit protesters. Those are outside agitators. Okay. There was a response from some folks to kind of say, well, hold on. No, they're not. They're from the community. They're actually friends of the protesters, right? To kind of try to neutralize the charge of outside agitator by saying, no, these folks aren't really agitators. They're organically connected. And, what our response is, so what if they're outside agitators? So what if it's somebody from a different movement who's a veteran of maybe, I don't know, Occupy Wall Street, or a veteran of the war in Iraq movement, or a veteran of the global justice movement, or BLM coming and saying, hey, we know how to organize. Here's how you run a meeting, or here's how you follow up with people, or here's how you engage in nonviolent civil disobedience, which is, Lisa Fithian, the longtime nonviolent civil disobedience trainer, is somebody who garnered a lot of headlines for being at Columbia. But this trope goes way back. It goes back to the civil rights era in particular, and it was used to delegitimize people like, for example, Martin Luther King, who would travel from town to town building the civil rights movement. And we quote him in the book by saying, none of us are outside. If we're all embedded in a world together, there is no outside. And that's the moral position, is to say, actually, we're all interconnected. Therefore, your fight, whether it's in the next state or it's all the way in Palestine, is actually something that I am bound to. And there's sociological research that shows outside agitators bring things to the table. And that's part of why they're so threatening to the status quo. They bring that sense of connection. They bring that sense of camaraderie. They bring skills and sometimes, training know-how that locals don't possess. And also sometimes when you're in connection with outsiders, with people from far away, it expands your sense of self and possibility. So there's a reason outsiders are, demonized, seen as so threatening. And, our position is, instead of trying to neutralize the charge, let's just lean into it and say, actually, no, being an outside agitator is worth worth aspiring to.
Yeah, and I appreciated that you all leaned into that. And the first time I even heard of that framing was actually with Cop City. So I'm from Atlanta, raised there, and it's being constructed, for those who may not be familiar. It's a multi-million-dollar public training facility that is largely going to training police that happen to have affiliations. Georgia is a big one. They get training in Israel, and they apply a lot of those same militarized tactics to Southerners. So speaking of, outside agitators, we got people who are across the globe who are agitating inside of the U.S. You have foreign militaries who are training our people. So in a world that has become more globalized, so not just in the U.S., but across the globe, it's hard to say that anyone is truly an outsider. And so when I was talking to some of the organizers against Cop City, this, Stop Cop City movement, that's what they brought up. People who are coming in from out of town, it's useful that they feel an affinity to what's happening, because a lot of times that's going to happen on their doorsteps as well. They're building more quote unquote cop cities around the country. Before the cop city in Atlanta, I heard about one that's in Chicago. So these things, that a lot of these elite and, plutocrats, politicians, that they try and limit us when they're not limited. They're unlimited in who they get influenced from and what they do in America's borders. So let's talk about something else positive. Astra, because we're thinking about the problems, the challenges that we have, but there's also really good work that you both have been doing. And I want to talk about your organization, Debt Collective. I first became familiar with you and the organization, I want to say, when I was an editor at Essence. We were covering some of the work that you all were doing. I thought, like Leah said, I thought it was ingenious that you're thinking about this debtors class, and therefore there should be a debtors union. So can you talk more about your organization and how it relates to solidarity?
Yeah, and thanks so much for including stories of the Debt Collective in your book. I mean, it's really essential, to any reporters and journalists listening, to use your platform to actually cover movements in a way that is not demeaning, that doesn't just repeat the outside agitator slurs, that actually, seriously engages questions of strategy. So the Debt Collective is an experimental union of debtors. And I say experimental because there's never been a debtors union before. We're inspired by the labor movement in the idea that people can come together and wield economic power. But we live in a moment now where, as we discussed, labor law restrains a lot of the ability of people to organize in unions. A lot of folks are precariously employed, or they're students, or they're retired or should be retired. But we're all in the economy. And increasingly, we have to debt finance the necessities of life. So that means we have to take out student loans to get an education. We have to use credit cards to pay for our health care, our dental care, our rent, our necessities. People owe back rent, to a degree that is actually shocking. And of course, the American dream is having debt. It's having a mortgage because we don't have social housing. Subprime auto loans are a huge problem because we don't have public transit. So people need vehicles, right, in order to just get to work. And often those vehicles are the homes of last resort. We have people living.
You said subprime auto loans? That's a thing?
Auto loans. Yeah. It just means high interest, predatory auto loans. And so Americans are indebted because we are living in a society that underpays us at the job. So your boss robs you once, and then that creates an opportunity for someone to lend you money at interest. So then you're robbed the second time. And of course, the absence of social services is what drives this. Because if there was universal health care, there wouldn't be medical debt. If there was universal dental care, there wouldn't be care credit, at the dentist's office. And so the idea is that debtors can come together and exert power together to demand debt cancellation and what we call reparative public goods. So, and we've been leading the fight for student debt cancellation. And we've won a ton of it. I think this is part of the sort of complex consciousness that Leah and I are trying to get at, right? When it's like, if I flash back to 10 years ago when we were just thinking about the debt collective, we were like, wow, like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could erase $1 million of debt? I mean, that just seemed unfathomable. So we were doing actions and teach-ins and spectacles. And the Biden administration has canceled over $160 billion of federal student loans. So over 5 million people have been liberated from this debt. I mean, that is a number that boggles my mind. And as an organizer, I have to relentlessly be like, that is not enough. But the truth is, it's something that never would have happened if people hadn't come together to demand it. If we hadn't done the legal research, if we hadn't played the role of kind of radicals, we went on debt strikes, engaged in what we call economic disobedience, but we also did the inside policy work. We also, created a coalition that included racial justice groups, labor, got people bought into what seemed like an impossible dream. We also found allies in Washington. We also made friends with experts, to use their incredibly granular knowledge for positive ends. And, and so I think there's more to do, but, what we've polarized the American political party so that one party is the party of debt relief. Now, there was lots of caveats to that, and I could fill a whole session with the ways that the Democrats have not done this to their full ability and have kind of set themselves up to fail at the Supreme Court. There's lots there, but medical, there's now bills being proposed by people like Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders to cancel medical debt. We now have, representatives talking about school lunch debt cancellation, which is another thing the Debt Collective has been working on over the last few years. And so this is the thing, we were just like 10 people in the beginning, and now there's thousands of members. But like when small groups of people come together, you can move the needle. And so to me, I'm just like, what if more people were part of this effort? What if more people were, experimenting in other ways? Like, we actually do have more power than we think, but only when we build solidarity and work together. And just like the category of work, one thing we show in the book is the category of worker didn't just exist. We really linger on this. There were craftspeople, painters, cobblers, smiths, farmers. Like, people didn't think of themselves as united under the umbrella of worker or the working class. That had to be constructed over time as a response to changing economic conditions. And we're doing something similar with debtor on a much more rapid time scale, right? So it's not just, we had to work to get people with student debt from different schools to see themselves as in solidarity. Now we have meetings where there's people with different kinds of debt seeing themselves in solidarity. So, identities, identities evolve over time. Solidarity helps us kind of transcend the boundaries of those identities and invent new ones, and see ourselves in a shared struggle and fight. But for me, it's just been a really interesting, moving experience to be in the Debt Collective. And I sometimes have to remember the past to kind of go like, oh yeah, I didn't just expect all these messages every day that was like, I got my debt canceled, because now that's what my life is like. And it's something that truly, I think I could not have imagined when we started this out. It's just a bunch of weirdos with some weird ideas at Occupy Wall Street.
I mean, and what's so cool is that, yes, you had the ideas, but you put it into practice so beautifully. And you're putting this idea of solidarity into practice by finding a category, finding an identity for people that crosses generations and ages and class, because even well-off people, they've got debt and they might want to be class traders and be a part of the movement. You've got, young people, just all types across race, obviously, and gender. So I just think that it was really novel to find something like that in a world where division seems to be taking hold of everything. But to have these examples hopefully gives us a little bit of hope and a vision for the possibilities. So speaking of class traders, Leah, you come from a well-off family, and you've talked about this, and you have a chapter where you all talk about the problem with charity and how philanthropy is often used by capitalists to beget more wealth. And, the audience is probably full of socialists and other lefties like myself. And so we, of course, have a natural skepticism for, I would say, the masses of wealthy people, of capitalists, of the ownership class trying to do what's right. When doing what they do, they're incentivized to create more wealth for themselves. So how much faith do you have? You've been in these circles, you've been in these spaces. How much faith do you have in the bourgeoisie, or at least enough of them, listening to you all and recognizing how you can have philanthropy and solidarity? Do you have any faith? Is it more so like an abstract longing? What do you think?
I don't have a lot of faith. I think that we're in a tough situation though, because in the past century we've created a tax structure that privileges charitable donations and has created nonprofits with 501c3 status, out of which a lot of us do our organizing, and then those are dependent on philanthropic contributions. And that happened simultaneously as we implemented stronger, harsher labor law to start breaking down unions and other institutions that were self-funded by the working class. So we live in, many of you probably know the concept of the nonprofit industrial complex, that it was actually a Black Women's Liberation Collective, I think, coined that term in the book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. But so that's kind of the situation we're in, is, with a charitable class that doesn't really have the same goals in mind as the organizations that they're funding. And so that disconnect is going to constantly kind of undermine progressive work. So I do believe that there are class traders out there, and that there may be enough of them to fund alternative efforts. And I've spent my life trying to help those people organize and help politicize folks who have that possibility that they could help resource more left work. But personally, I think we need to rebuild kind of self-funding organizations. We need to rebuild the labor movement, and organizations that aren't dependent on philanthropy. But along the way, a lot of us are trying to raise money for nonprofit work, and so I advise people to see wealthy people as organizing targets. They can grow politically, especially through ongoing long-term relationships. And so to treat them as people who can be moved, not just as fundraising targets, but as actually as people who you might be in relationship with over the long term, and who could become more and more of an ally. But it's hard because the incentives are at odds. But I think that it's all about organizing, and organizing across class is part of that. It's not something that we talk about a lot, but it takes deep hard work. But I think it's something that we all have to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Leah. And we've got some questions in the chat, which we will get to. So this is actually going to be my last question for you all, so that we can get to some of these pressing comments from, this is all in solidarity, right? So we want to get questions from the audience, get them involved here. And so in the final chapter for both of you, you characterize solidarity as something that is sacred. And you say, we need to embody devotion and dedication if we want to wield power in numbers. And we're working against enormous challenges and adversaries and even violence for that dedication as people who care about these causes. So I want to ask you all, just for yourselves individually, y'all heard Astra's, all of her activities, everything that she has going on. And so I want to ask you all, what are some practices that you've done to stay devoted and dedicated, be it emotionally, physically, or otherwise?
I can start. Yeah, we talk in our last chapter, we get kind of more spiritual. The last chapter is called Solidarity in the Sacred. And we do think it's important to have basically daily practices, rituals that help you stay grounded and stay connected and stay hopeful. We talk about virtues of solidarity, things like courage, justice, humility, curiosity, ways to kind of stay open, open to learning and open to other people and being connected and getting involved. But when you think about, capitalism kind of structures your life in a way with daily rituals of buying and selling and acquiring money and losing money. And most of the rituals are around money. And it's really important to just intentionally structure your life around rituals that nurture you and nurture your relationships. But that's a great question. Nobody's actually asked me like which ones do I do? I mean, for me, it's like finding projects that I stay involved in and work on every day, and that connect me with people who are different from me, but who I feel like we're working towards common goals. And it really feeds me. It really nurtures my soul to be, right now I'm involved with some labor work around I'm really excited about the kind of developments at the UAW and the Teamsters just affiliated with the Amazon labor union. And, how can we support this burgeoning movement? So, and like thinking about that, working on that every day, is actually like a really nurturing practice for me.
Yeah, I can hear it's like TMI, but I can hear my younger sister being like, never ask Astra about her like life balance or anything, because I'll just be like, my work is what I love. But it's true. Like the thinking and the doing and, getting to be in community with Leah and work on this project together and getting to have that intellectual creative space of writing this book and being like, what do we really think about this? Wow, what actually happened? Who are our ancestors that we want to honor? Who are the people that we're actually fighting? I mean, just getting to really engage in those questions was such a pleasure for me. And echoing what Leah said too, I mean, part of I think for me, what's so powerful about organizing, and I think it's also what drew me to filmmaking and to journalism, is just getting to talk to people who aren't like me, who have different perspectives, different life experiences, and feeling connected to that world, feeling connected to the world, is really powerful. I think sometimes people ask me like, how have I stuck with the Debt Collective so long? And part of it is, I don't know, the more earnest questions like, well, we're fighting the good fight and I want to change policy and all that. But like being an organizer is also a chance to kind of be bad. You get to disrupt things. You get to make mayhem. I mean, otherwise like being an adult is just like you're supposed to just do the right thing all the time and be good all the time. I mean, we went to DC last week. I'm quite proud of us. We did a Fund Education, Not Genocide action in Washington, DC. I'm proud of us because I just think it's important to connect what's happening in Gaza with other issues, right? To say, when we're talking about the peace that we're aspiring to, it's not just the absence of this brutal war, but the provision of people's, basic needs, right? It's not just the absence of this violence, but also the presence of care in the form of social supports that help us all live flourishing lives. But we disrupted a corporate convention at a hotel, and and stuff like that is like fun. Like the hotel workers like shook our hands on the way out, and so I think just part of that, just tapping into that energy is honestly part of what keeps me going. I'm in it for the mayhem.
Yeah. So doom scrolling on Twitter is not the solution. We got to go outside, right? Kind of touch some grass.
No. I don't use Twitter. Yeah, just barely. Twitter's bad.
Yeah, I think hope, though, I mean, more seriously, I am always coming back to Miriam Kaba, that hope is a discipline. Actually, because we're up against a lot. The climate clock is ticking. Our feeds are full of, absolutely devastating images and anguished people and parents, every minute. I mean, it is enough to make you want to just hide. And yeah, I mean, we're not after the kind of naive optimism of like, oh, it'll all turn out, but like the disciplined hope that people had before us when they were fighting against tremendous odds and trying to change the world. And so I think that, that is a phrase we just keep coming back to.
Well, thank you, Leah and Astra and Haymarket Books for making this conversation possible. You two aren't just doing the writing, like I said, it's very evocative and powerful and profound writing in this book, and profound and important ideas. But as people have heard, as I've heard, they're also going outside and making trouble and doing things and organizing. And so the fact that you're able to have this praxis, I just want to commend you two for that, because it's work. It's a lot of work, and I'm sure it's exhausting. Or like Astra, it feeds her. So, for a lot of people, it's exhausting. So thank you. And if anybody, if you want to be at home, you want to just give them a hand clap, just give them a hand clap. And we're going to start transitioning now to some questions, because we've got a few in the chat. So let's start. I'm just, going to try and get to as many as possible. So one of them is, how do ideas of mutual aid fit into the story you're telling about solidarity? Are the two things identical, or are there different histories, theories?
Yeah. Oh, mutual aid was definitely, like, historically, it was part of a similar conversation about the importance of solidarity. It had a little bit more of an anarchist kind of orientation, but the idea that even that the state could actually help support mutual aid was also discussed. I think of it as like an ecosystem of activities that need to be done to cultivate solidarity. So there's like work you can do as an individual to cultivate solidarity. There's work you can do organizationally, and then there's work we can do at the level of the state. So I would fit mutual aid definitely into that ecosystem. But it's also like we need to get to the policy level if we want that to kind of scale and to have kind of broader impact over time. But the mutual aid is like it's kind of like one of those practices that turns you into a solidaristic person, and that like shows you the kinds of policies that like the kind of world that we want to build. So I think it is really, really important.
Okay, so moving on to the next question, what about the fault lines between relationships, if those are the basis for solidarity? Thinking here about major political divisions within families or friend groups. Would y'all like to take that?
I mean, that's a tough one, but I think it's actually just speaking to what it is to be human. I mean, I'm thinking about my friend, the late great anthropologist David Graeber, who people probably know from his book, The Dawn of Everything, that was published just after he died. It was an international bestseller. Or his book, Debt, The First 5,000 Years. And so David was one of the folks, he was the person who invited me to Occupy Wall Street. And he was one of the kind of co-schemers in the group that sort of was the precursor to the Debt Collective. And sometimes I'd lament like, oh my gosh, this meeting, people fought, there was conflict. And he was just like, that's anthropologists study communities, and that's just what people do. This is part of it. I think on some level that's grounds to just be like, okay, this is something we're going to have to cope with. I think we counsel these virtues that Leah has mentioned, and some of them, speak to ways we can engage with others to bridge some of those divides, to cope better with conflict. And And we do this, right? We try to reach across these relational rifts and differences. Why? Because we need each other to win. We need to build a movement or movements, plural, with as many people as possible, because we are, being outspent and outgunned in some situations. And so this is like a strategic, there's strategic reasons for trying to do this. We're trying to build movements, because otherwise we're just building subcultures. And subcultures are nice, but we need to do more than that. And so we counsel things like curiosity. That's one of our virtues. Where are people coming from? Where some humility, like maybe we don't have all the answers, and so we need to approach people with a spirit of humility. Some forbearance, we need to create paths so that there can be repair. And this is the thing at the heart of the idea of why we focus on the idea of transformative solidarity. It's the conviction that people and systems can change. No person's set in stone. No system is immutable. There's no ancient hatreds that are actually just eternal and can never be, never be ended. Like this faith in transformation, I think, is really fundamental to us. And so, the last chapter of the book, which is on the sacred, actually talks about treating people, our relationships being rooted in the idea that nobody's disposable, and so that. And that can mean trying again for strategic reasons to have a kind of spirit of patience, to kind of welcome people wherever they are on their journey. We don't all begin as perfectly woke anti-capitalists. We all begin where we begin. And I think part of our job as organizers is not just opening the door, but really trying to invite people through it and holding space for folks to change their mind. So that's work. That's emotional labor, but that's the labor of organizing. And it's not always easy, but it's really essential.
That's right. And it's normal, to have disagreements and to have to bring people into the fold. So we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. And one of them asks, can you both speak to what a solidarity framework would look like if applied to the climate catastrophe? What would it say about who to ally with and on what terms? If Leah, you want to start with that?
Sure. I wish I could ask this person more about what they're thinking about. But I think that, our focus on solidarity is in part on strategy and outcomes. And so the climate catastrophe is real and happening fast, and so I think it is important to build as big of a coalition as possible. We talk a bit in the last chapter about the Standing Rock protests, and I think the importance of allying with indigenous communities, people who are sort of at the front lines of experiencing the fossil fuel industry on their lands, impacting their water. So I think it's really important to be allying with people who are really on those front lines. But I think we can also we need to ally with people who are thinking about big policy solutions. There was frustration. We had a vision for the Green New Deal, and there was frustration around the Inflation Reduction Act not doing everything that was in that initial vision, but it's making progress, and I think we have to just keep pushing like it is a climate emergency, and I think we all need to be throwing ourselves into that like it's the existential crisis that it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, and I think that we talk in terms of what we would picture. We talk about this idea of the solidarity state. So solidarity at different levels, our interpersonal relationships, our organizations we're building, and then at the level of policy. And we talk a lot about the need for climate reparations in terms of the cancellation of these sovereign debts, so that there can be investments in climate resilience. Again, we're trying to create a framework of sort of next level policies, not sort of our utopian horizon. But I do think, on the climate crisis, it is an all hands on deck, like align with who we can moment, just given the scale of, the scale of the interest that we're up against. I mean, I don't know if people saw, there was a poll yesterday that was going around that was like, over half of Americans want to see fossil fuel companies in court, like to see, I mean, even after all of the relentless, misinformation around climate, I mean, this is still something most people are concerned about, and they want to see the people behind this crisis, pay in some way. But to build the power that we need to actually change things, it's very daunting. And so, and obviously, we're going to have labor at the table. We're going to have these frontline communities. But yeah, it's a big job, a big question. We do get a bit into some of the things we'd like to see in the book.
Climate is big. And so, these are questions that we've had to grapple with for a really long time. And, there's just so many forces against it and so much greenwashing that's happening, even though these corporations say that they're in solidarity with us and they're actually not. So yes, that's a huge one. So we've got time for this last question, and somebody asked to get some more clarity about reactionary solidarity. They said, can you speak more about that? Is the ideology neutral? That will be our final question.
Yeah, so we create this distinction, and I actually will say, I think Astra had this idea of, solidarity is kind of a neutral concept. It's not always a good thing. It can really go in different directions depending on how it's used and what the ends are that it's directed towards. And so we define reactionary solidarity as kind of exclusionary group cohesion that is based on a strong distinction between the us and the them. And the them should be annihilated. The them, it cannot kind of come, is not welcome. And it's, whereas transformative solidarity is trying to build a bigger we, it also involves an us and a them, but the them can be transformed. The idea is that, the them may change, that there is porosity. It's more like the Martin Luther King, idea of beloved community. So we believe that in any case there is going to be polarization, because we think that people are at odds. Like, there are people who are trying to succeed on the backs of others, and so the purpose of this distinction, but it can happen both ways. You can see reactionary solidarity on the left at times, when we become too purist and too exclusive. So we think that the distinction can kind of help us orient towards the kind of solidarity that we should strive for, which is still principled, is still clear about its goals, but sort of always has a window open, for the possibility that things can change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah. I think the thing is, for reactionary solidarity for us, it's not just like that it's mean because it's exclusive and insular, right? So, I think for us, the classic examples of reactionary solidarity sort of at its most sort of visible would be white supremacy, ethno-nationalism, religious fundamentalism, are examples of reactionary solidarity, but that these formations tend to abet the concentration of wealth and power, right? Like, reactionary solidarity is also the things that plutocrats are trying to, it's the mode plutocrats are trying to encourage, right? Like, oh yeah, you white working class, it's the immigrants that are the problem. They're taking your jobs. They're the reason the economy is bad, not because your employers are, stealing your wages and hoarding wealth. And so there's a kind of misdirection inherent in reactionary solidarity. So we're making a sort of political value judgment of it as well. And this aspect of, again, the transformative and transformative solidarity, it's this idea that people can change and that systems can change. So, I think this point that Leah made is key. It's like, we think you have to polarize. There's always an us and a them. And, but you can target people as representatives of systems. So when we say we want to abolish billionaires, it's not some essentialist thing. It's not the same thing as being against people for their gender, or sexuality or their race. It's the position you occupy in the economy is unjust. And so we want to abolish billionaires as a structural class, and you'll be actually better off for it. You'll probably be less weird in a bad way if you're no longer a billionaire. But you can come down to earth and join the ranks of ordinary people, maybe have some relationships that aren't just based on the fact you have way too much money. So I think it's a useful framework, because I think it was important for us to acknowledge that solidarity is not neutral and not always good. But the good kind is really good, since we're ending. The transformative kind is really good. And it is the basis for building the power that we need to change things. It is, we believe, the precursor, the foundation of multiracial, egalitarian, solidaristic, democratic, socialist, whatever you want to call it, small d democracy, right? Because it's trying to include more people, trying to expand the circle of inclusion, I would say beyond the human to the more than human world. And it's something that we can actually, we can build it day by day in our relationships. And so it's really important stuff. And, I'm excited that we got to write this book together and actually think about it, because I drank the Kool-Aid of solidarity over the last couple of years. I'm writing this, and hopefully it's helpful to people as they're trying to figure out how to make some change.
Wonderful. Thank you for that closing note, Astra. And if you all want to drink the Kool-Aid, it's extra sweet on this side. They added some good sugar in there, because otherwise we're dealing with a lot of ugliness and bitterness. And this book, I feel, is a wonderful, timely antidote to that. So thank you, Astra. Thank you, Leah, for this talk. Thank you for your work, not just the writing work, but the work of going out there, going in the field, trying to organize people around these concepts, and a very crucial one, as you all have brought to the fore, around solidarity. And thank you to Haymarket Books for hosting this event. Even though this is not one of their books, they still wanted to partner with the authors to host it. So thank you all. And for that Kool-Aid, Solidarity, the past, present, and future of a world-changing idea. It is available in bookstores. Check it out to get more of these insights. Thank you so much for joining us.